The Rosewood Valley Vineyard stretched across 300 acres of California's most coveted wine country, its rolling hills covered in perfectly manicured rows of Cabernet Sauvignon and Chardonnay grapes. The main estate house sat at the highest point, a stunning Mediterranean-style villa with terracotta roofs and sweeping views of the valley below. It was the kind of property that appeared in luxury real estate magazines with price tags that didn't include dollar signs, just the words "upon request." My parents' 35th wedding anniversary celebration was being held on the estate's grand terrace, where 80 guests sat at elegant tables draped in ivory linens. Crystal glasses caught the golden afternoon sunlight. The air smelled of jasmine and expensive perfume. A jazz trio played softly near the stone fountain, and waiters in crisp white jackets moved smoothly between tables, serving hors d'oeuvres that probably cost more per bite than most people spent on entire meals. I sat at the far end of the family table trying to make myself invisible. It was a skill I'd perfected over the years. How to exist in a room without taking up space, how to be present without being noticed, how to belong to a family that had never really wanted me there. My dress was simple, a navy blue wrap dress I'd ordered online for $68. My shoes were comfortable flats from a discount store. My jewelry was minimal. A simple silver necklace that had belonged to my grandmother, the only person in the family who'd ever made me feel like I mattered. In contrast, my sister Jessica wore a champagne-colored Elie Saab gown that probably cost more than a used car. Her husband, Robert, looked polished in his Armani suit. My older brother, Michael, and his wife, Vanessa, were equally impeccable in designer attire that screamed old money and good breeding. Then there were my parents, Richard and Eleanor Bennett, looking like they'd stepped out of a town and country magazine spread. Mom's diamonds caught the light every time she moved her hands. Dad's custom suit fit him perfectly, aging gracefully into his 63rd year. And me, 31-year-old Sophie Bennett. The family disappointment in a discount dress. "Sophie, you're so quiet over there," my mother's voice carried down the table. "Are you all right? You look tired." It was her polite way of saying I looked poor, unsuccessful, worn down by a life that hadn't lived up to the Bennett family standards. "I'm fine, Mom. Just enjoying the view. The vineyard is beautiful. Isn't it?" Jessica interjected, her voice bright with enthusiasm. "When Robert and I were looking for anniversary venues, this was at the top of our list, but it's so exclusive. You practically have to know someone who knows someone just to get a booking." "Your father pulled some strings," Mom said proudly. "He went to Harvard with the owner's brother. Though I suppose we'll never meet the actual owner. Apparently they're quite reclusive." I took a sip of water and said nothing. "The booking fee alone was astronomical," Dad added. "But nothing's too good for your mother on our 35th anniversary. This estate produces some of the finest wines in California. Their 1947 Reserve collection is worth over $2 million. $2.3 million actually," I said quietly. Everyone turned to look at me. "What?" Dad asked. "The 1947 Reserve collection. It's worth $2.3 million at current market value. The 47 Cabernet Sauvignon alone is valued at $400,000 per bottle." Jessica laughed. "How would you possibly know that?" "I read about it somewhere." "You read about it," she repeated, her tone dripping with condescension. "Sophie, you work at a bookstore. You live in a studio apartment. You drive a car that's older than some of the wine here. Maybe don't try to pretend you know about things like vintage wine collections." Several guests at nearby tables had turned to listen. My face flushed, but I kept my expression neutral. "Jessica, that's unnecessary," Michael said, though his tone lacked conviction. "I'm just being honest. Someone has to be." Jessica turned to address the table more broadly. "I mean, can we acknowledge the elephant in the room? We're at one of the most exclusive vineyards in California, celebrating Mom and Dad's anniversary, and Sophie shows up looking like she's here to serve the wine, not drink it." "Jessica." Mom's rebuke was gentle, more concerned with appearances than actual disapproval. "What? I'm sure Sophie knows we love her, but let's be real, she can barely afford her rent. How did she even afford to come here today? The gift alone that Robert and I brought cost more than she probably makes in a month." The table had gone silent. Even the jazz trio seemed to have paused between songs, making Jessica's words echo across the terrace. I felt every eye on me. The family disappointment. The one who'd never measured up. The Bennett child who'd somehow failed to inherit the family's business acumen or social grace. Sophie works very hard, Dad said, his voice strained. Her circumstances are different from yours and Michael's, but she's doing her best. Doing her best. As if my life was something to be pitied, explained away, apologized for. Michael cleared his throat. Maybe we should change the subject. Today is about Mom and Dad, not Sophie's financial struggles? Jessica finished. You're right. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have brought it up. She reached across the table and patted my hand in a gesture that managed to be both condescending and dismissive. We know you're trying, sweetie. It's just hard watching you struggle when the rest of us have done so well. Something inside me snapped. I'd spent 31 years being the quiet one. The one who absorbed the criticism, the judgment, the casual cruelty disguised as concern. I'd listened to countless dinner conversations where my siblings discussed their successes while I was an afterthought. A cautionary tale about what happens when you don't live up to your potential. But they didn't know. None of them knew. I reached into my purse, a simple leather bag I'd carried for years, and pulled out a document. It was folded neatly, slightly worn at the creases because I'd been carrying it with me for the past week, deciding whether to bring it today, whether to finally end the charade. I unfolded it carefully and slid it across the table toward my father. What's this? He asked, frowning. Just read it, Dad. He picked up the document, his expression shifting from confusion to concentration as his eyes scanned the text. I watched his face change, confusion to disbelief, disbelief to shock. This can't be right, he whispered. What is it? Mom asked, leaning over to look. Jessica was impatient. What, is it some kind of loan application? Sophie, if you need money you should just ask instead of. It's a property deed, Dad interrupted, his voice barely audible. For this estate. The Rosewood Valley Vineyard. The table went completely silent. Don't be ridiculous, Jessica said. Sophie doesn't own anything. She can barely afford. It's dated 3 years ago, Dad continued, still staring at the document. Purchase price, $87 million. Owner of record, Sophie Marie Bennett. You could have heard a pin drop on the terrace. Even the jazz trio had actually stopped playing now, the musicians sensing something significant was happening. Mom grabbed the deed from Dad's hands, her eyes wide. This is impossible. Sophie, what is this? Some kind of joke. It's not a joke, Mom. I bought this property 3 years ago. You're celebrating your anniversary at my vineyard. That's insane, Michael said, leaning forward. Where would you possibly get $87 million? This has to be fake. Before I could respond, a man in a pristine white jacket and black bow tie approached our table. Jean-Pierre, the estate's master sommelier, carried a bottle of wine like it was a newborn child. Pardon the interruption, he said in his elegant French accent. Miss Bennett, I wanted to personally confirm. Shall I open your 1947 reserve for the family? As you requested in your notes, I have the 47 Cabernet Sauvignon ready. It's an exceptional vintage, one of only 6 bottles remaining in your collection. Every head at the table turned to stare at me. Jessica's mouth had fallen open. Robert looked like he'd seen a ghost. Michael's expression had shifted from skepticism to something like fear. My parents sat frozen, still clutching the property deed. Yes, Jean-Pierre, I said calmly. Please open the 47 Cabernet. Let's make this anniversary truly special. Excellent choice, Miss Bennett. I'll decant it immediately. He gave a slight bow and departed. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Jessica found her voice. How is this possible? I took a sip of water, letting them wait, letting them wonder. Do you remember when Grandma Rose died 7 years ago? Of course, Mom said slowly. She left you that money. $20,000. We told you to invest it wisely, but you said you were going to use it for something special. I did use it for something special. I bought my first property, a small apartment building in Oakland that was being sold at a foreclosure auction. The building was structurally sound but cosmetically dated. I spent 6 months renovating it myself. I learned plumbing from YouTube, electrical work from online courses, carpentry from community college night classes. You renovated a building? Michael's voice was incredulous. You. Me. I worked 3 jobs during the day, yes, including the bookstore, and renovated at night. When I was done, the building's value had tripled. I sold it for $200,000, paid off the loan I'd taken for materials, and had enough left over to buy 2 more properties. Dad was shaking his head slowly. This doesn't make sense. Even with successful flips, you couldn't get from $20,000 to $87 million in 7 years. You're right. Real estate flipping alone wouldn't have done it. But property flipping taught me how to identify undervalued assets. I started studying commercial real estate development patterns, zoning changes. I learned to see opportunities that others missed. I paused, looking around at their faces. Years of being dismissed, and now they were hanging on my every word. 4 years ago, I identified 12 properties in the Bay Area that were positioned perfectly for the tech boom expansion. I bought them all, using a combination of my real estate profits, investor loans, and partnerships with development firms. When the tech companies expanded, they needed commercial space. I had exactly what they needed. How much did you make? Robert asked quietly. He was an investment banker. He understood numbers. The 12 properties cost me $4.2 million collectively. I sold them 18 months later for $63 million. Jessica made a choking sound. After paying back my investors and partners, I walked away with $38 million. I was 28 years old. Mom was crying now, though I couldn't tell if they were tears of joy or shame. I took that money and diversified. I bought vineyards, including this one, because I'd learned that luxury real estate holds value better than almost anything else. I invested in commercial properties in emerging neighborhoods. I started a private equity firm that focuses on agricultural land acquisition. A private equity firm, Dad repeated numbly. Bennett Agricultural Holdings. We own 11 vineyards across California and Oregon, 4 cattle ranches in Montana, and controlling interests in 3 organic farming cooperatives. Our total assets under management are approximately $240 million. The number hung in the air like smoke. But you work at a bookstore, Jessica whispered. You live in a tiny apartment. You drive a 2015 Honda Civic, yes. The bookstore is actually mine. I bought it 2 years ago because the owner was retiring and I didn't want to see it close. It's more of a passion project than a business. The apartment is a studio I keep in the city for convenience. My actual residence is a 4-bedroom house in Presidio Heights that I purchased for $8.3 million. I could see Robert doing mental calculations, his banker brain trying to process everything. Why? Mom finally asked. Why keep all of this a secret? Why let us think you were struggling? Biz, you never asked. In 7 years, not once did any of you ask about my life beyond surface-level observations. You saw what you wanted to see. The disappointing daughter in the discount dress. It was easier for you to believe I was failing than to consider that maybe I was succeeding on my own terms. That's not fair, Michael protested. We invited you to family dinners, to holidays, where you spent the entire time talking about your successes while assuming I had nothing to contribute. Do you know how many times I sat at family dinners listening to you discuss real estate investments, property values, and development opportunities? I could have joined those conversations. I could have shared insights that would have been valuable. But you'd already decided I didn't belong in those discussions. Dad's hands were trembling. Sophie, we didn't mean to make you feel excluded. Didn't you? Jessica just spent 5 minutes explaining to this entire party how I can barely afford rent. She asked how I could even afford to be here. And none of you defended me. You just nodded along, embarrassed by your poor relation. The waiters were approaching with the appetizer course. But Jean-Pierre intercepted them, quietly redirecting them away from our table. He understood that something significant was happening. When you booked this venue, I continued, did you ever wonder why the booking agent was so accommodating? Why they gave you the premium date on short notice? Why they waived half the usual deposit? Mom shook her head mutely. Because when they entered Bennett into their system, it flagged as the owner's surname. They called my office to confirm. I told them to proceed with the booking to give you everything you wanted. I thought maybe, just maybe, it would be a nice gesture. That I could give you this beautiful anniversary celebration at my property, and perhaps afterward, I'd tell you the truth and we'd all laugh about the misunderstanding. But then Jessica decided to humiliate you, Vanessa said quietly. She'd been silent until now. Sophie, I'm so sorry. We've all been awful to you. Not awful, I corrected. Pissed, blind. You saw what you expected to see. Jean-Pierre returned with the 1947 Cabernet, now decanted in a crystal vessel that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. He poured a small amount into a glass and presented it to me. I swirled it, inhaled the complex bouquet and tasted it carefully. The wine was extraordinary, layers of flavor that had developed over 76 years. A piece of history in liquid form. It's perfect, Jean-Pierre. Please pour for everyone. As he moved around the table serving wine worth thousands of dollars per glass, my family sat in stunned silence. I need to ask you all a question, I said once everyone had been served. And I want honest answers. If I had told you 5 years ago that I was buying properties and building a business, what would you have said? Michael shifted uncomfortably. I probably would have told you to be careful. That real estate is complicated and you should consult with professionals. I would have worried, Mom admitted. I would have thought you were in over your head. I would have lectured you about risk management, Dad said quietly. About how you didn't have the education or experience for that kind of venture. Jessica was crying now. I would have told you it was a waste of time. That you should get a real job first, build a foundation. I would have dismissed it completely. Exactly. So I didn't tell you. I built my business in silence. I made mistakes, learned from them and kept going. And the whole time, you assumed I was failing because I wasn't succeeding in the ways you understood or valued. I took a sip of the extraordinary wine. This vineyard produces 40,000 cases of wine annually. Our revenue last year was $18 million. I employ 67 people. Vineyard workers, cellar staff, hospitality team, administrative personnel. Every single one of them knows who I am and what I've built. But we didn't, Dad said, his voice breaking. Your own family didn't know. Because you never looked. You saw the discount dress and assumed it meant discount life. You saw the old car and assumed it meant no money. You never considered that maybe I was choosing to live modestly while building something significant. The other guests on the terrace had started eating their appetizers, but they kept glancing over at our table, clearly aware that something dramatic was unfolding. What happens now? Michael asked. Now you finish your anniversary celebration. You enjoy the wine, the food, the beautiful venue. You take your photos and make your toasts. And tomorrow you'll go back to your lives with a slightly different understanding of who I am. Will you forgive us? Mom asked, tears streaming down her face. There's nothing to forgive, Mom. You made assumptions based on limited information. We all do it. The question is whether you can accept the reality instead of the assumption. Of course we can, Dad said quickly. Sophie, you're brilliant. What you've built is extraordinary. I'm so proud of you. Are you proud of me or are you proud of what I own? The question hung in the air. Because here's the thing. I'm the same person I was 20 minutes ago. I haven't changed. The only thing that changed is your perception of my worth. And if that perception is based solely on my net worth, then we don't really have a relationship. We just have a transaction. That's not fair, Jessica protested. We love you. Do you? Because you have a funny way of showing it. You've spent years making me feel like I don't belong in this family. Like I'm somehow less than. And now that you know I'm wealthy, suddenly I'm worth your respect. It's not about the money, Michael insisted. Isn't it? Then why did Jessica feel comfortable mocking me about my dress and my car in front of 80 people? Why did Dad describe my life as different circumstances? Why has this entire family treated me like a charity case for years? Nobody had an answer. I stood up, setting my napkin on the table. I'm going to walk through the vineyard for a bit. I need some air. Enjoy your dinner. Sophie, wait. Mom reached for my arm. I'm not leaving. I just need a moment. This is still your anniversary party. Celebrate it. I walked away from the terrace, down the stone steps that led into the vineyard rows. The afternoon sun was warm on my shoulders. The vines stretched out in perfect lines, their leaves rustling softly in the breeze. I'd bought this property because I loved it. The land, the history, the craft of winemaking. It wasn't about the investment potential or the prestige. It was about creating something beautiful and sustainable, about being a steward of land that would outlast me. But my family had never asked why I made the choices I made. They just judged the visible results and found them wanting. Footsteps behind me. I turned to see Vanessa, Michael's wife, approaching hesitantly. Can I talk to you for a minute? She asked. Of course. I need to apologize. I've been part of the problem. I've participated in conversations where we discussed your situation. I never questioned the narrative. I just accepted it. Why are you apologizing? You barely know me. That's exactly why I should apologize. You've been part of this family for the 10 years I've been married to Michael, and I never made an effort to actually know you. I just accepted everyone else's version of who you were. I considered her words. Thank you for saying that. What you've built is incredible. Not just the financial success but the courage it took to do it alone without family support or recognition. I don't know if I could have done that. You do it every day. You're a pediatric surgeon. You save children's lives. But I had support. I had a family who believed in me, professors who championed me, colleagues who respected me. You had none of that and still succeeded. That's remarkable. We walked in silence for a moment, the vineyard stretching around us. Can I ask you something? Vanessa said. Why did you agree to let them book your venue? You knew they didn't know it was yours. You could have just said no. Because they're still my family. And despite everything, I wanted to give them a beautiful anniversary. I thought maybe the gesture would be enough, that I could give them this gift anonymously and that would be my contribution. But Jessica ruined that. Jessica is Jessica. She's always needed to feel superior to someone, and I've always been her convenient target. Today she just took it too far. Are you going to tell them they need to leave? It's your property. You have that right. No. This is still their celebration. I won't take that away from them no matter how angry I am. We turned back toward the estate, walking slowly through the vines. For what it's worth, Vanessa said, I think you're the most successful person in your family. Not because of your money but because you've figured out who you are and what matters to you without needing anyone's permission or approval. That's rare. When we returned to the terrace, the main course was being served. My seat was empty and everyone looked up anxiously when I appeared. I sat down without a word. Dad cleared his throat. Sophie, we've been talking. We want you to know that we're going to do better. We're going to actually get to know you, to understand your life and your work. We've been terrible family members and we want to change that. Do you want to change because it's the right thing to do or because you found out I'm wealthy? Both, he admitted. And I know that's not the answer you want to hear, but it's honest. Yes, finding out about your success made us realize how wrong we've been. But that realization is valid regardless of the catalyst. I'll think about it, I said. The meal continued awkwardly. Other guests kept shooting curious glances at our table. The family whispered among themselves, trying to process everything. Jessica had been silent since my return. Finally she spoke. Sophie, I'm sorry. I've been cruel to you for years. I made myself feel better by making you feel worse, and that's inexcusable. Why did you do it? She looked down at her plate. Honestly, because you never fought back. You never defended yourself or bragged or competed. You just existed quietly. And that made me feel like you didn't care, like you'd given up. So I convinced myself that you deserved the criticism, that I was somehow helping you by pointing out your failures. But I hadn't failed. You just couldn't see my success because it didn't look like yours. I know that now. The sun was beginning to set, painting the vineyard in shades of amber and gold. Jean-Pierre appeared with another bottle, this time a rose from our current vintage. Compliments of Ms. Bennett, he announced, pouring for the table. This is from our reserve collection, not yet released to the public. Notes of strawberry and white peach, with a mineral finish characteristic of our terroir. Everyone tasted it dutifully, murmuring appreciations. It's exceptional, Robert said. Sophie, I'd love to talk to you about your business sometime. From an investment perspective, what you've built is fascinating. Maybe, I said noncommittally. Michael leaned forward. I want to understand how you did it. The strategy, the timeline, the decision-making process. Would you be willing to share that? Why? So you can write a business school case study about how your sister succeeded despite her family's low expectations. He flinched. No. Because I'm genuinely interested. And because I want to understand who you actually are instead of who I assumed you were. I studied his face, looking for insincerity, but found only earnest regret. All right. Coffee next week. Just you and me. We'll talk. Mom stood up, tapping her wine glass with a spoon. The terrace quieted as everyone turned to look at her. I want to thank everyone for coming to celebrate 35 years of marriage with Richard, she began, her voice wavering slightly. Today has been full of surprises, and I've learned that the most important things are often the ones we overlook. She looked directly at me. I've learned that success comes in many forms, and that a mother's job is to see her children for who they truly are, not who she expects them to be. I've failed at that job with my daughter Sophie, but I'm hoping she'll give me the chance to do better. The guests applauded politely, confused but supportive. Dad stood next to her. My daughter Sophie owns this magnificent vineyard. She built a business empire while we weren't paying attention. And she was generous enough to let us celebrate here despite having every reason to say no. Sophie, thank you. For this venue, for your patience, and for being the person you are despite our failure to see you. More applause, this time accompanied by surprised murmurs as guests processed the revelation. I stood up, raising my glass. To Mom and Dad. 35 years of marriage is an achievement worth celebrating. May the next 35 be filled with clearer vision and deeper understanding. To Mom and Dad, the table echoed. We drank and I caught Jean-Pierre's eye. He nodded and disappeared into the estate house. 5 minutes later, waiters emerged carrying a cake I'd ordered weeks ago. A 7-tier masterpiece decorated with edible flowers and gold leaf, topped with a miniature replica of my parents on their wedding day. Oh my God, Mom gasped. Sophie, did you arrange this? I did. Before the whole dramatic revelation. I wanted you to have a beautiful anniversary regardless of whether you knew this was my property. She was crying again, and this time Dad was too. The cake was served, champagne was poured, and the jazz trio launched into The Way You Look Tonight, my parents' wedding song. As the evening wore on and the sky darkened to deep purple, guests began to depart. They approached me one by one, introducing themselves properly, expressing admiration for the property, asking for business cards. I was polite, professional, and non-committal. These people had been content to ignore me when I was just Sophie in the cheap dress. Their sudden interest was noted but not trusted. Finally, only family remained on the terrace. The staff had cleared the tables and were resetting for a morning wedding the estate was hosting the next day. I should go, I said, gathering my purse. Where will you go? Mom asked. Surely you're not driving back to the city tonight? I keep a room in the estate house. I'll stay there. A room? Jessica asked. The owner's suite. 400 square feet, separate entrance, views of the entire valley. Could we see it? Mom asked tentatively. Could you show us your home? I hesitated, then nodded. All right. Come on. I led them through the estate house, past the commercial tasting room, through the private cellars where millions of dollars in wine aged in French oak barrels, up a private staircase to the 3rd floor. My suite was simple but elegant. Exposed beam ceilings, a stone fireplace, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the vineyard. The furniture was comfortable rather than ostentatious. Books lined one wall, real estate textbooks mixed with novels and poetry. It's beautiful, Vanessa said softly. It's home. Or one of them anyway. We stood at the windows watching the last light fade from the sky. The vineyard lights had come on, illuminating the paths between the vines. Sophie, Dad said finally, what do you need from us to rebuild this relationship? Honesty. Curiosity. The willingness to see me as I actually am rather than as you expect me to be. And time. Trust isn't rebuilt overnight. That's fair, he agreed. And one more thing. If we're going to have a relationship, it can't be based on my wealth. It has to be based on genuine connection. So we're going to spend some time figuring out if that's possible. How do we do that? Michael asked. We start small. Coffee dates. Phone calls. Conversations where you ask about my life and actually listen to the answers. We build from there. I'd like that, Mom said. Me too, Jessica added quietly. We stood in silence for a moment, watching the stars emerge over the vineyard. I should let you all get home, I said. It's a long drive back to the city. They filed out slowly, each offering awkward hugs and promises to do better. Jessica was the last to leave. He paused at the door. Sophie? That dress you're wearing. It looks really nice on you. Thank you. I mean it. You look beautiful. You always have. I'm sorry I never said so before. After they left, I stood alone in my suite, looking out at the vineyard I'd built while they weren't watching. My phone buzzed. A text from Michael. Thank you for today. For the celebration, for the truth, for the chance to start over. You're incredible, Sophie. Another from Vanessa. Coffee Wednesday? I'd love to hear more about your work. And I promise I'm interested for the right reasons. One from Mom. I love you, sweetheart. I'm so proud of who you are. I'm sorry it took me this long to say it. And finally, one from Dad. You built something extraordinary. Not just the business, yourself. You're the strongest person in our family. Thank you for not giving up on us. Yet. I smiled, set down my phone, and poured myself a glass of wine from my private collection. Tomorrow the estate would host a wedding. Couples would take photos in the vineyard. Guests would toast to new beginnings, and life would continue at Rosewood Valley. And I would continue building, creating, living my life on my own terms. Visible or invisible, acknowledged or dismissed. It no longer mattered whether my family saw me. I'd finally learned to see myself.